Welcome, everybody. I think we are now on week number 7, which means that we would be on lesson number 6. And as a little update, because this is week 7, that means that this upcoming week, next week, and the following week, the next 2 sessions are going to be workshop sessions. So we're going to dedicate the next 2 weeks to giving you all a chance to share your work with the entire group, to get feedback. For those of you that aren't able to do it next week, because of time, you'll have the following week to do it. And so, that hopefully will give you guys enough time to get your work ready to turn in, because 3 weeks from today will be the due date for your final pieces that will appear in the next issue. After that due date, then we'll have 2 more lessons to go, and that'll round up this current series. So ya estamos casi a la mitad. Más bien, we're now past the halfway point. If you guys are still working on your poems from the previous 6 sessions, you're more than welcome to upload them to Google Classroom. This week, I do plan on getting through all of the submissions that are uploaded to Google Classroom for you guys to be ready with some feedback from me. But again, next week and the following week will be your chance to share with the rest of the group and get feedback from everyone else. Yeah, there you go. See, Abraham's saying right there, we'd love to have the work of the people presenting for you to give comments. So yeah, if you guys are willing to share, I think on Google Classroom, if you actually in the stream post a link to your Google Drive file, to your Google Doc, you'll be able to share it with the entire group. If not, I'll look into it, but either way, just be prepared. Like I said, next week and the following week is 2 workshop sessions. Para empezar, ¿hay preguntas? Does anybody have any questions about the last couple of weeks that we've, talked about different things? Sufism, the political, social philosophies, anything like that? No? All right, that sounds good to me. In that case, let me go ahead and get us started with our handout. Ready to learn. Thank you, Mao. All right, ladies and gentlemen, aquí les presento a la señora Gwendolyn Brooks. Gwendolyn Brooks was born on the 7th of June, 1917, and passed away the 3rd of December in 2000. Gwendolyn Brooks fue poeta, autor, catedrática norteamericana y la primera afroamericana premiada con el premio Pulitzer. She definitely lived a pretty spectacular life, and as you can see here, again, she was the first African-American poet to receive the Pulitzer Prize. Gwendolyn Brooks is best known as a poet, although Gwendolyn Brooks did write several other types of works. Pero aquí la cita de hoy viene de ella y dice, somos la cosecha de todos, somos asunto de todos, somos la magnitud y el vínculo de todos. And in English, it reads, we are each other's harvest, we are each other's business, we are each other's magnitude and bond. Let me drop it in the chat here for you too, so you can see it as we discuss. Pero ¿qué piensan? ¿Cómo les parece la cita que viene de hoy? Great quotes. Thank you, Kathy. What else? What else are y'all thinking about Gwendolyn Brooks's quote here?
I think we're getting closer to unity.
Community, for sure.
Community, you said?
Yeah.
Could you expand on that a little bit?
Well, I mean, in terms of the second part of the quote, we are each other's business. I mean, I feel in communities, business owners, at least small business owners, they open up shop to serve a need in the community. And, as patrons of that business, we can help that business in basically its mission of serving the community. So I guess we have as much part in their, in their vision and mission as the business does itself. So without us, there would be no business. So I think it's like it's a symbiotic relationship in terms of that, and also like just supporting each other in general.
Yeah, I like how you framed it in that way. Small businesses thrive because of the community. They kind of like that concept of the Main Street USA sort of idea. If every little business on a main street anywhere in the world is doing poorly, the community is generally there to help lift them up. If they're, I don't know, broken into, or if there's a natural disaster or something like that. It's because I think people understand that there's a family there, right, that is affected. So I feel that.
The caveat, though, is the type of business, because when you have like a conglomerate, or say like Amazon or Walmart, that tends to change. They serve a global community, but they're not always as helpful in the community as, say, like businesses owned by like everyday people.
Yeah, I think that's why your idea of the small business idea is a big part there. Jess, and then I think Tina.
Hi, I was getting something to eat, but can I read the quote again, or can I see it again?
Yeah.
And then when you I think this is like, if I read it right now and I think about what Mauricio said, I think that this, once I see it, the quote speaks kind of to what we learned about the very first time. If you want to go like, or someone was going to go that route, says we are each other's business, we are each other's magnitude and bond. It's like, I hear a lot of people say like, because I just started using Amazon when the COVID happened. But before that happened, like using all conglomerates, Walmarts, they take over small businesses and whatever, but it speaks to that, which says like, we are the bond, it is our business. Like if we didn't truly believe in that, then we would reach out. I think people should, if you want to make that your business to support small businesses and worry about conglomerates, then start official like boycotts of different vendors that go to Walmart and say, we're no longer going to purchase you until you bring up Walmart employees up to 20, depending on their job, right? A livable wage. I used to work at Amazon and I only lasted 3 days there in the warehouse because I honestly, and I say this like, it sounds, well, you can take it how you want to take it, but this is how I said it, and I don't mean it in any bad way. But honestly, the amount of money that I was getting paid to do, it was not for the work and the conditions that I had to work in. I could find other ways to support my living expenses that offered me a means to a different opportunity. Even if it was working at McDonald's, right? Making the same amount of money or $3 less. It was not the same amount of pressure on my back, fighting for parking, no benefits, freezing in the warehouse, then it's burning up hot and there's no fan. Like, when he says it is our business, so then we live in America, the best country in the whole, my opinion, the whole world. We can do that. You can get 100 people and say, we're going to stop buying Coke, and you tell another 100, you stop until Walmart pays whatever because they sell Coke there. Just pick them, just our, could say our Amazon. So big business, small business, it's all our business. I kind of get what he says there. Like, don't take you, I try not to take me out of the equation when it comes to us.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And I think that's kind of one of the core ideas that Gwendolyn Brooks is saying in this quote is, we are each other's harvest, right? We are what we put into one another. We are each other's business. We're responsible for taking care of each other. We are each other's magnitude and bond. So the greatness of each individual is the thing that makes us all great. At least that's kind of how I see it, and kind of how I'm understanding what you're saying, Jess. Because yeah, you're right. Like if a person has an issue with like a Walmart or an Amazon, it's on that individual to do something about it, right? Just like it's on the individual. And it's just like how it's on every individual to do something about a small business that is struggling too, because yeah, we're all responsible in some way or another for the economy if we're looking at it from that point of view.
Well, that's what he's saying. He's like, we all are. Yeah. Like, we're accountable for every good and every bad, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's depending what level of are we contributing.
Right. Yeah.
Jumping off of that, like it doesn't just fall on businesses. It even falls on like on a global way. Like what's our footprint for the environment? Like, all of us play a part in this. And even like things that may, for I guess the average person may not even come into their frame of mind, like civil wars that happen in other countries. Like I think what we can do may be smaller, but there's always something, however small, that we can do, whether it's raise awareness, talk to more people about it. I mean, like, I don't know, that's where I was getting at. Just, it's not just business oriented in small communities. Like our influence can reach others that are outside of our day to day.
Well, I remember two phrases coming up, and one in school it says, "You help me roll my log, and I'll help you roll yours." And the other phrase is, I don't know if it's biblical or not. Together we stand, and divided we fall.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Kathy also in the chat is picking up on the same thing, right? Like we all have to be conscious of the impact that we have, and where we put our energies. Abraham's been patiently waiting. You raised your hand, man. What you got to say, Abraham?
Well, not to bring you guys down, but it's a lot of micro decisions nowadays that we cannot really choose as much, because the choices that we have, we're not even clear where things are coming from. Like your shoes coming from a country that's using people as almost as slaves, and you don't know all these little things thanks to globalization, because all the parts coming from different parts, you cannot keep track of that. Even your food, like where's it coming from? It's the cow being treated well, or all these factors. So the thing is, like, the bigger we have grown as a society and as a world, the harder it is for us to make a single choice that's kind of informed.
That is very true. Right? Because of how complex our economy is, because of how complex our society is. It's not easy. I mean, you could very much get paralyzed by how many things you would be against or for, and whether or not something is accessible to you or not. Like Amazon is convenient because it's cheaper, and in most cases you can get things delivered pretty quickly in 2-3 days if you're not a Prime member. If you are an Amazon Prime member, you can get stuff next day. And Amazon also, not to like say that I'm completely for Amazon, because Amazon does need to change a lot of things, but Amazon does have their Smile Amazon Smile program where 1% of their purchases, or 0.1% of a purchase, the profits that they make, they donate to a community-based organization. Distill Arts benefits from smile.amazon.com. Every time that you buy something from Amazon and you're registered, or you registered Distill Arts as your nonprofit of choice, Distill Arts gets a donation from Amazon. That's honestly, to this year, helped me pay for things like postage, which is not a ton, but this year I've spent a lot more money on postage than I've ever spent, because I'm mailing off a lot of zines and other materials for workshops. So like, there's good and bad to all things, right?
And it employs a ton of people.
And it does,
I mean, that warehouse was jam-packed 24/7.
Yeah.
So people can be Oh, it's when people are getting off. The people that need that is their sole source of income.
Amen. Yeah.
You know.
The thing is that we want to have those kind of huge businesses. We should be able to have them check how they operate and be beneficial for people working, like you were saying.
Right.
You're working there, but if you're not making a living, what's the point, right?
Yeah.
Well, the point, that they're making their living. It's not a living; they're making their living that they need. Like a living is there is no a living. Your living is whatever your living costs are per individual, per family.
Right. And that kind of goes back to a little bit of our conversation on, political and economic theories, right? When we were talking about socialism versus capitalism, a lot of people like to talk shit about capitalism, but the fact of the matter is that capitalism is the economic structure that we live under, but you can have a socialist capitalist economic system and government. They're not mutually exclusive. And that's, I think, where most people sort of get confused. We can, tax the super rich enough to the point where they still have a good, comfortable way of living. But also those of us that are earning less than $40,000 a year can also have a very comfortable way of living because we don't have to worry about our health care. We don't have to worry about our education, those kinds of basic needs. So, these are all, I think, ideas that maybe Gwendolyn Brooks is a quote from today is touching on. Kathy, you raised your hand. You had a comment, a question?
Oh, I had another comment. One of the things that intrigued me, I worked in credit card processing, and as we work worldwide and we bring that technology in, it's really fun to see micro businesses. I heard micro a little bit, and you have these business owners ramping up. Like when Square came about on the scene, businesses can now take credit cards and it can do that, and that's amazing for me. Oh, it's their competitor.
Can I just say this, please? It's
Yeah.
a classroom, but I'm working with the Friday church program, so I'm going to have to leave, and I'm going to try and come back as soon as possible.
Okay.
We have a Zoom meeting.
Okay, Ms. Lois. I'm glad that you joined us at least for now.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
What I'm saying is big organizations can support the small. They can support it. It can be supported. But that's all I had to add.
Yeah, and I mean, look at what Mauricio just dropped in the chat. His elotero, his local elotero had Square. I mean, how revolutionary is that? To where you could have an elotero, a person that is a street vendor, able to take credit card payments, thanks to a company like Square. I mean, I've brought up Square before because Square is the platform that I invested in from the very beginning when I started DSTL Arts. That was the very first platform that I found that was relatively inexpensive, easy to use, and allowed for DSTL Arts to take donations through credit cards, for me to sell zines and all of those things through credit cards. And now, that DSTL Arts has grown for the past 8 years. It's also what I use to process my payroll and to pay my teaching artists. It's what I use to create schedules and to send invoices and all sorts of other things that, are kind of, out of reach or at least used to be out of reach a long time ago for businesses. So yeah, if a big corporation can invest in the community and see a value in investing in the community, I think that's what Gwendolyn Brooks's quote was trying to get at. It's that idea that we are, in fact, each other's business, that we are, the magnitude and the bond of each other. So, not good for his taxes. I mean, everybody's got to pay taxes, right? Like, if we want to have, everybody pays taxes, honestly. If you're even talking about sales tax, your sales tax on anything gets you, your public library, right? It gets you, streets that are not so full of potholes, depending on where you live, Um, like those are the ways in which our economy can function. So ultimately, I think what we should take away from the quote from Gwendolyn Brooks for this week is, we're responsible for one another, right? We kind of are yeah, I don't know how to better say it. We should take into account that we all have to take care of one another. We are interconnected. We are responsible for our own individual actions and for our own individual thoughts and ideas, but also, have the power to impact the thoughts and ideas of others, and especially all of you as writers, as artists, because the more you create media, the more you create the things that people consume on a regular basis, the more influence you have on them and even their identity, which is the next part of our handouts. But before that, does anybody else have any last questions or comments? Because I think I might have skipped someone. I think it was Tina and David. Did you guys have your hand raised earlier? No? Okay. All right. If I did skip you, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. But to continue on for today, this part of today's lesson I've taught before. We've talked before about the 5 stages of identity formation, and this is kind of like my own version of it, and it is based on the work of these 2 people, Erik Erikson, who was a German-American developmental psychologist and psychoanalyst, and Beverly Daniel Tatum, who is an African-American psychologist, author, and educator that specializes in race and identity studies. So, this is sort of my own version of their work, turned into something a little bit more easier to understand, at least for me, which I think, most people can follow along with pretty easily. If you have an interest in learning more about them, I do recommend that you take a look at Beverly Daniel Tatum's work, especially because Tatum has really done a lot of interesting things in studying the way that Black kids specifically feel and how they feel integrated into society, which, right now, because of all of the different discussions about race, you can see that most people of color don't feel like we're part of the larger society. Pero aquí tienen las 5 etapas de la formación de identidad. La primera etapa es infancia. And infancy sounds basically like what it is, right? The first stage, we're born, right? We don't, as children, probably up to like about the age of 3 or 4, we don't really have a strong sense of self. And definitely not when you're a baby. We do not have an individual identity. There's no way to measure whether or not a baby can distinguish themselves as a person, because we can't talk to babies. But it's pretty much the stage in an identity where you're completely reliant on others to care for yourself, or to offer you guidance in how to care for yourself. Now, keep in mind that this 5 stages of identity formation aren't just for race and ethnicity. This could also be for, like, say, gender, or it can be for a person that is, new to a particular economic system or a particular, society, like an immigrant. They may not know how they fit into the larger society. So that's generally how infancy works, is that they have to rely on other people to receive guidance. Stage 2, the reflejo, as I translated it here, is the point where you're mirroring the surroundings, right? You're looking at the customs and the habits and the culture of the larger, more dominant society, the hegemonic society, as it's called. And you still don't quite have a sense of being different. You're still learning the ways in which you're supposed to interact, right? What the expectations of you are as an individual. That could mean, learning that you simply speak only English, right? Or that you speak only Spanish, and that's how you interact with your family. And this is, at least for most cases in which you might use this, this is for dealing with family as a child. So we're talking about, stage 2 is normally going to be around the ages of like 4 up to about like 6 or 7 years old for the majority of kids. Some of these things, keep in mind too, you can revert back to them. So you can go backwards or forwards on the scale. But here you're still not quite feeling like you're different. You still think in your mind that you are accepted as an equal to everyone else. Then comes the encounter, right? So stage 3, el encuentro, would be probably the first time that if you're a person of color, you experience racism, or if you're a woman, you experience some sort of patriarchal limitation or some sort of prejudice. This is that moment where you're made to feel othered, where you're no longer invited to be part of the main group, right? For me, I can tell you that that happened when I was in kindergarten. I was 4 years old, and I went to school, and in kindergarten I realized that I didn't speak English very well, and 2, the white kids thought I was kind of gross and weird because I was a brown kid, and because I ate different food than them. So that sense of being othered is going to be the encounter, that moment where you're made to feel less than, and it produces a sense of shame. So that's probably the most profound moment of a person's life, is when they're made to feel ashamed of their family life, of their family or home identity. And usually what happens at that point is that the individual will respond by turning their back on those customs or cultures, right? It's going to be something where, like, you might not, if you only speak Spanish at home, you'll want to only speak English at home, because you are afraid of getting ridiculed for having an accent. Or if you're poor, if you grow up economically in poverty, or as part of the lower class, you might start to, try to fake that you have a name brand of something. I think of when the Notorious B.I.G. Talks about, in one of his songs, Juicy, he talks about sewing little tigers on his polo shirts so that it looks like he's wearing good clothes, but it's actually just a fake version of it. So that's the adopting of the hegemonic society norms. So las normas societales son sumamente importantes en esa etapa. Then, after a while, after time, because there's repeated encounters, there's repeated moments where a person is made to feel not like the rest of the group, the rest of the world, and they're no longer accepted, and they reach a breaking point, and that's when they go to stage 4, which is the immersion phase. And because of those repeated encounters of racism or sexism or economic classism, because of that, the individual will react against the hegemony. They'll react against those people in power, and then they'll start to embrace their original home culture again, almost to like the other extreme, right? Where on one side they totally turned their back on their home life, then they'll swing back like a pendulum and go to the even, to the furthest that they can in embracing their traditions and their cultures and their customs. And sometimes it could be where they're, almost militant or flagrant, as it says here, in representing their identity. And keep in mind, when it says cultural identity, that doesn't mean just race or ethnicity. It can mean a lot of other things. like their gender identity. That's a type of culture that surrounds it. For myself, I would say that this happened when I was maybe like in middle school, and I started wearing a sarape to school because I was very proud to be Mexican. And eventually, it started off kind of as a joke, but eventually it was just like, no, I'm proud to be Mexican. I'm proud that my family came from Mexico. And I started to get into lowrider culture, and then I started to get into, hip hop and all of these other things that I felt, reflected me as a person. So much so that even when I was in college, I was taking all the Chicano studies classes that I could take. I was talking a lot back then about like revolution, and I was all like pro Che Guevara, before understanding that he was a flawed human, and I was all about communism and socialism before understanding that they're just a political socioeconomic theory that can be used in a different way than how most communist countries use it, and have perverted it. But that's all aside, right? Because that immersion phase, I was so against basically white culture, that I was pro anything that was non-white. Of course, that's not healthy, right? To be stuck in that identity is not always the healthiest, because like we've talked about in the past, being entrenched in these views, you close yourself off to the other ways of being. And a lot of times, people will close themselves off to understanding that we're all really just, the product of our environment. We're all actually responsible for one another, like Gwendolyn Brooks was saying. And for some people, it's very difficult to come out of this phase. And in my case, I can't say 100% that I'm in the final phase. I kind of float back and forth between phase 5 or stage 5 and stage 4, because stage 5 is what would be called the amalgamation phase. And this is the time when, after a lot of lived experience and after, seeking out greater understanding, and education, this is where the person might on their own look for other ways of living. They'll find that there are other people that have similar ideas, but maybe aren't exactly like them, right? And the individual might internalize their home identity. They may finally reach a sense of comfort with who they are, and also they'll accept and work towards understanding the larger society. They'll actually open themselves up to working with other groups, other ethnic groups, and other racial groups, and other gendered groups, in a way that feels productive, in a way that feels like, they're creating a strong sense of unity between themselves as an individual and their larger community. And, in the case of like, say, wanting to do good for their community, they might, take Amazon for what it is, or Walmart for what it is, and see both the good and the bad that come out of those large corporations, and do their best to, find a way to get by in society while still making a difference. So stage 5 ends up being a lot of times when, we get a little bit older. And like I said, I can't claim to be in this one myself, because, when I was younger, I might have thought that I had reached this phase, but then I went to Cal Arts and I started my MFA program, and I totally reverted back to this phase right here, the immersion phase, where I was really angry at all white people at that point, and I was not open to listening to their way of understanding the world. And I probably wasn't doing the best job that I could to educate them on what it was like to be me, because I was maybe alienating them in the way that I felt they alienated me. So those communication breakdowns, they because of the immersion phase, being in this phase again, I was probably not doing, justice to myself and to my classmates. But generally speaking, these would be the ways in which most people end up developing an identity. This is the way in which most of us, if you could trace it throughout your life, will find specific moments that represent each one of these different ways of being. And again, this isn't just about race and ethnicity, but this is also, something that could relate to a gender identity, or it could relate to, socioeconomic identity. If you feel like you're in any one of these phases, in one side of your life and then in another side of your life, that's very possible, because we are more than just one identity at any given time. It's what we were talking about before with intersectionality. Think of yourself as like a Venn diagram, and all these different things that make you who you are. They all are all changing and evolving independently and all at the same time. So, this right here, you can take it for what it is. If you feel like there's things that you could add to it, I definitely invite you to add more, because this is just one way of understanding how we evolve as people. So let's see, are there any questions or anything like that? I didn't exactly get to see you guys while I was presenting my screen, so let me scroll back here in our chat. But does anybody have any questions or comments on what I said so far?
I really like about this, what you just said right now goes back to the very first saying or quote we read at the very beginning of the session, which was that guy saying, like, you're the storyteller, it's your narrative, it's what are you gonna write? What do you choose to write about is what you choose people to know about.
Mm-hmm.
And to your point right now, where you said, culturally, all these different backgrounds could be social, economical, cultural, right? If we're not putting out the narrative, like Homeboy said in the very beginning, then these false narratives of Mexicans wearing serapes, or like Tina said, white people suck. That's like, that's like I said that too. I said Mexicans suck before. You know what I mean? Like,
Mm-hmm.
But my point being is, like, so if we're not doing this gentleman said at the very beginning, like writing, using our voice to say our narrative, there might be 10, 15 girls that can relate to mine, not exactly, but have something that they can relate to that was me. But it's really up to the writers, the poets of our time to create the material.
Mm-hmm.
So all of these learned behaviors, those new learning narratives will be incorporated in there. That as long as we continue to write. Because really it is, I guess, on us. I'm saying us, even though I don't consider myself a writer. I'm trying to consider myself a writer. But yeah, it really is up to us, if that's what our gift is or our talent is, to change any of those things. And I think, me personally, I'm constantly in all 5 of those stages in different areas of my life. I'm totally okay with going back to saying I didn't know shit about shit when I thought I knew something about something.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I tell my boys the same thing. You should always be, hopefully, at infancy stage somewhere in your life with something, because there's so much to learn.
Yeah, I think that it's important that we allow ourselves the chance to learn new things, because if not, we get stuck, and it is, I was trying to get caught up in the chats, and I did see, that Mauricio was asking, can a trauma cause a reversion? Totally. You can revert back to a particular phase because trauma triggers you and you end up falling off, right? Like I was saying, before I started Cal Arts, I was 25 years old when I came to LA and I started Cal Arts. And between the ages of 21 and 25, those 3 years that I was the director of a work readiness program for kids, I was very, open to working with white people. I met some really awesome white people that understood what it was like to grow up poor. I had friends when I was in elementary school that were actually more poor than my family was. So I got to see that, and I got to understand that being Mexican didn't mean being poor. It wasn't the same thing. I was able to fortunately see that there's different levels of this shit, right? And I mean, I say all of that to say, like, when I was 24 years old and I moved to LA, I had this view of the world in that, we could all actually coexist. It was not entirely necessary to call for revolution and the exiling of all the descendants of Europeans. Mecha, I saw somebody mention Mecha. Like, Mecha wasn't even hardcore enough for me. I was still like, yo, I'm all brown beret and Black Panther. Like, let's get this on. And I was very much about like that type of revolution. But again, that those 3 years, getting to meet really well-intentioned white people that also were not white saviors, that didn't come into my community thinking that they could change my community because there was something wrong with it. They came into my community because they knew that they had something to offer that, could maybe help my community lift itself up, right? Like, that's a very different way of thinking about things. And so seeing that in action meant that I was feeling that sense of amalgamation. I felt that sense of like, my community could be the community of a person that doesn't look like me too. It was sort of like a blending of all things. But then CalArts happened, and guess what? I went right back to being in my fuck all whole white people phase. And I was all for revolution again, which wasn't healthy, I have to say. It really was not healthy all the time. Kathy? Saw you raised your hand.
Okay, yeah, I did. Thank you. I like that stage 3. That's the turning point, right? That turning point where you start to feel othered, and then you don't necessarily have. I think this is where Mauricio's starting to tap in. We don't have the skill set on what to do with our reaction, on what to do with our responses. So I had the opposite experience growing up in La Puente, where the majority was Latino, and the white kids were being bullied. So, and theater was always like, for me, being in theater was already the other. I was already othered and shamed for going to theater. Like, that was already like, well, the weird theater girl. So that's where I found I went towards where there was least judgment, and at the same time always wanting to belong, always loving being Mexican and Latina, always loving it. Never felt any. I didn't know I was a target until college, until I did the diversity exercises, and I found out that, oh my, I'm in a target group. Oh, what? What's happening? Like, wait, and not knowing how to like, when I joined Mecha, they told me all these horrible things. I was like, I had no idea all of this was happening. I didn't know, right? Like what Jess was saying, you don't know what you don't know. What I love is the awareness, and as you're going through the stages, your consciousness is waking up. Your consciousness is waking up, because even though this identity formation, and we touched on spirit last week, and I feel like this is coming into the physical part of it, but from the spirit part of it, we're not different. Where there is no power. We go away from that, the political and the mono and the everything that we've broken down into separation and needing resources and needing all of that stuff. But here we come back into, okay, now we're here back on Earth. These are our stages. What do we do with it? And how do we connect the two? Because once we connect the two, we're able to create some really cool bridges.
Oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that's I think why it's important to be aware of even your, which phase or which stage of your identity you're in, and that we're I honestly believe this. We're all both physical and spiritual beings all at the same time, right? We are, living the existence of monism and polyism. Um, I'm totally getting that wrong right now, but y'all get what I'm saying, right? Like those are things that we experience all the time, and even more so when you add on the way that we look physically. Um, like I said, I grew up knowing kids that were white that didn't look like me, that were poorer than my family, you know. And seeing that, and my family, my mom saying, invita los que coman, because they didn't have any dinner, that meant a lot, because it meant like the power balance was different. And it meant that, because I had a little bit more, it was okay for me to share, right? And knowing a little bit more, I think that, it's okay for us to share our knowledge and our skills and our mindsets even, that's where I think what Gwendolyn Brooks says in our quote for today, Gwendolyn Brooks, and let me go back to it. And Gwendolyn Brooks is, I think, trying to remind us that we are our brother's keeper in a lot of ways, right? We are each other's harvest. We are each other's business, and we are each other's magnitude and bond. These are ideas that are, I think, more based on that kind of principle, right? That's a very spiritual principle, that we're responsible for one another, because ultimately we're all the same thing, Mexibillies, I like that. Good phrase. So like, there's definitely a lot to be said there about, just the oneness of all of us, right? We regardless of our background, regardless of where we come from, there's definitely a lot of things that we share in common that we aren't even always aware of. Abraham, I see you raised your hand.
I kind of like how these people is trying to explain the way we as individuals are adjusting to our surroundings, not just like environment, but also as a culture. Because as you can see, as infants, with how they're trying to figure out like what is going on, right? And then how we're gonna interact with people, and where do we fit, and then how do we interact with other people. All these things have their time and place, but I think each one can be reverted, like you were saying, and we should be able to go back to the infancy or the amalgamation and all these different factors, depends on the instance or the time that we meet them. And I think sometimes we forget about that, and we say, "Oh, I'm just in this stage, and I'm gonna stay here," and we try not to learn.
Yeah. It's hard enough to be an individual. See, I'll represent in Colombia. But it's hard enough to be an individual, but then you add on top of that the expectations of the outside world on you as an individual, and it's easy to get lost in those different stages of identity formation, and it's very easy to go back, and be triggered in a negative way to go back. Just like it's as easy to be pushed to go forward, as long as you're open to it. So, I think the main thing that we should kind of take from this is that we're always changing, right? And we're always evolving. And, the poems that we'll be looking at today, they aren't necessarily about the identity stages, but they're more about how, poems themselves can sort of evolve and change over time, and maybe in a way reflect some of the changes that we might experience, right, as we become more aware, self-aware. And I'm gonna preface it, what we're about to get into by saying there was a lot of really shitty moments that I lived at Cal Arts, but there were some good ones, and some of the good ones actually are different ideas that I personally started to develop when I was thinking about my writing. And so the type of poem that we're going to look at today is one that I created, at least as far as I know. I've never heard anybody else refer to a poem this way, or think of a poem in this way. I call it recombinant poetry. And I tried to give you guys like a basic definition of what a recombinant poem is. But the idea is that it's a poem that shuffles and reorganizes individual lines of verse, words, and phrases to create variant lines in each successive verse. O sea, cada línea que se escribe es un variante a lo que se ha escrito antes. It's totally taking the words in a line of poetry and chopping some off, adding a couple, and rephrasing every single time what was just said. Does that make sense to everybody? Now, I don't know if y'all have ever heard of the phrase recombinant, but it's normally used in biology. So, in recombinant DNA is a type of DNA, or a recombinant organism is a type of organism that when it reproduces, it's cloning itself to a certain degree. But every time that an item, or like say DNA, clones itself, it reproduces, it loses a little bit of itself each time. That's why we age, for example. The DNA of a human being has what's called a telomere at the end of it. And with every time that it's reproduced, a little bit more of the telomere, it gets lost. Think of like when you photocopy a photocopy, the quality of a photocopy gets worse every time that you copy it. And so think of a recombinant poem that way. It starts to sort of shed the excess and starts to funnel down to something that is even shorter and shorter and shorter each time. So that's the basic structure. That's the basic idea behind this type of poem. Not combatant poetry, recombinant. But I'm glad that you pointed that out. So I'm actually going to give you all 2 examples of recombinant poems. And I actually translated them just today when I was creating the handout. So the Spanish, that's a new version of it. I've never done it before like that. But would somebody like to actually volunteer to read the poems? Any takers?
I'll read the English one.
All right. Go ahead, Jessica.
You wrote this, Luis?
Yep.
All right. Tombstone. Luis Antonio Pichardo. No one ever said it would be easy living with you, but it was much more difficult to die. No one ever said it would be easy to die, but it was much more difficult living with you. I should probably put on my glasses. No one ever said it was difficult living, but it was... Can I start over, Luis?
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry.
It's okay.
No one ever said it would be easy living with you, but it was much more difficult to die. No one ever said it would be easy to die, but it was much more difficult living with you. No one ever said it was difficult living, but it was easier dying with you. No one ever said it was difficult dying, but it was easier living with you. No one ever said I would live, but I did, and it was easiest with you. No one ever said I would die, but I did, and at that time I knew. No one ever said a difficult thing until you. No one thing ever said difficult until you. No one ever said difficult, you. You never said difficult too. You never said you. You never. never you.
Excellent. Thank you, Jess.
Always. No, that was good.
Thanks. No pressure. Yeah. Anybody want to read it in Spanish for me? Any
I can
volunteers?
try it.
All right, go for it.
I'll give it a shot. Nadie dijo que fuera fácil vivir contigo, pues fuera mucho más fácil, mucho más difícil morir. Nadie dijo que fuera fácil morir, pero fue mucho más difícil vivir contigo. Nadie dijo que fuera difícil vivir, pero fue más difícil morir contigo. Fue más fácil morir contigo. Nadie dijo que fuera difícil morir, pero fue más fácil vivir contigo. Nadie dijo que fuera vivir, pero lo hice y fue lo más fácil contigo. Nadie dijo que fuera morir, pero lo hice y en ese tiempo lo supe. Nadie dijo una cosa difícil hasta que tú. Ninguna cosa dijo difícil hasta que tú. Nadie dijo difícil tú. Tú también nunca dijiste difícil. Tú nunca dijiste. Nunca dijo tú. Tú, nunca, nunca tú.
Thank you, Kathy. See some snaps. You think you know what tonight's assignment is? Yeah, sort of. But what do y'all think of the poem? You know, feel free to analyze it. Don't worry that I wrote it. What do y'all think? Mao?
Towards the end, it sounded like dying last words.
Well, I'm gonna tell you that the prompt is the title. So that would be the tombstone, my tombstone. Yeah. But aside from that, what do y'all think of the form as a recombinant poem? Abraham?
It kind of reminds me of the telephone game. Somebody says something and the other person tries to copy it, but something is lost in translation. So here every part has a little change here and there.
Yeah.
So it's never the same, but it has almost the same essence.
Yeah. Yeah, that's actually more or less kind of where the idea came from, was the telephone game, you know? Imagine if you were to do that with every line of the poem. The way that like DNA decomposes over time, your lines will decompose over time. Yeah. So yeah. Good connection.
A feeling of unraveling comes through, like you're unraveling an onion.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's another good way to think of it. You know, it is like the poem is beginning to unravel. It's starting to lose some of the excess. Yeah. Tina, David, did I see y'all raise your hand? I think it might have been Mauricio then. Mauricio and Jessica.
Let me try to redeem myself because I didn't make the connection with Tombstone. It seemed like kind of what Catherine was saying, like how meanings were kind of like going piece by piece. Like I think in the first ones, you know, acknowledging that maybe it was difficult living with this person, but then it wasn't, it made it easier. So it was almost like kind of pulling back the superficial and eventually just, you know, reaching like the truth that is love, the truth that is what, you know, what the poem is really about. I feel like a lot of poetry do the opposite of that. You start off with like, you know, the core of it and then add more layers and embellishments. And I think your poem did the opposite. It's like we rid ourselves of embellishment, of skin, of meat. We're just left with an essence.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, for sure. I think it was Jessica was next, and then Miss Michelle raised her hand as well.
Let me see. Okay.
There we go. Sorry, Miss Lois. We can hear some noise in the background. If you don't mind muting just for a moment.
I'm having trouble with the computer, so I'm leaving. I'm in another room now.
Oh, okay. All right.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Looks like Miss Michelle's having issues too. All right. Well, in any case, let's see. Oh, Miss Michelle, if you're
Yeah, I was
Yeah,
gonna
there you
say, for some reason I got knocked off a moment ago, but I kept thinking about a tumbleweed. You know, going through the desert, as the wars got faded towards the end. In the end, I thought about tumbleweed, how it goes away, blows away, and fades away elsewhere. That's what I thought about towards the end of the poem. But like I said, the tumbleweed is one place in the desert, and then it eventually goes one way, and then another way, and it fades away. That's what I thought about with the poem, because it's like someone mentioned earlier, the poem's in layers, like I'm peeling of an onion. Maurice, I like that. And I'm peeling of an onion, and I'm peeling of the layers that come off. The truth is told, and then boom, that's it, and everything's just settled, or maybe unsettled. I don't know. Hey, Mauricio, that's cool. So anyway, that's what I'm thinking about.
okay.
So you're wondering,
Yeah.
is it even though 2 and 2 is settled, where do we go from here? The final act or the final finale. That's when. So when the tumbleweed goes away, goes one way to another way, it eventually stops. You know, a tumbleweed can be prickly, it could be thorny, they become dry and brittle and lifeless.
If that helps you kind of understand the function of the poem, right, and the structure of it, then yeah, you know, you could look at it that way, like the way that a tumbleweed, you know, appears and then breaks down as it continues on. That's a good way
It's like the uncertainties of life, and what we're going through right now.
Yeah. You know, it is like a losing of itself along the way. Yeah. So, unless if anybody has any other questions or comments on the last poem, we actually have 2 poems, because I wanted to make sure that I gave you all enough examples to understand where, you know, at least what my intentions were with recombinant poetry when I created it as a style. So this next one, do I have any volunteers here that'd like to take this one on? All right, go for it, whenever you're ready.
There's a meaning of life found in the core of an apple that we can't find. There's a core meaning in an apple that I can't find, and neither can you. There's a meaning of cores in apples that God can't find too. A meaning in apples at the core of life that God can't find does not mean it's because of you. There's a meaning that can't be found because God is not in you. There's a meaning God doesn't want you to find because of you. God can't find a meaning in apple cores for you. There's a meaning God can't find, nor can you.
Excellent. Thank you, Mom. And in English, I'm sorry, in Spanish, tengo ahí alguien. All right, Ivan, go for it, my man.
Los corazones de manzana, para Siri. Hay un sentido de la vida que se encuentra en el corazón de una manzana que no podemos encontrar. Hay un corazón sentido en una manzana que no puedo encontrar, ni tampoco tú. Hay un sentido de corazones en manzanas y la vida que Dios también no puede encontrar. Un sentido dentro de manzanas en el corazón de la vida que Dios no puede encontrar. No significa que es por tú. Hay un sentido que no se puede encontrar porque Dios no se encuentra en ti. Hay un sentido que Dios no quiere que encuentres porque Dios no puede encontrar un sentido en los corazones de manzana para ti. Hay un sentido que Dios no puede encontrar, ni tampoco tú.
Excellent. Thank you, Ivan. Was it an on-demand poem? No, that actually wasn't an on-demand poem. It wasn't one of my commissions. I wrote that one back when Siri was actually first introduced on the iPhone. So that's why it's for Siri. Because I don't know if you guys remember, but that very first year that Siri was introduced, at least I remember there being like articles and people posting, that they would ask all of these existential questions to Siri, and Siri couldn't respond, or would direct people to something completely different from what they were asking. So it was kind of like poking fun at that idea that people would ask Siri something so deep and existential. But again, here the form of recombinant poetry, right? As I thought of it, as I kind of was forming my own ideas about the style. It's you take the line and then you remix it. You switch up the order of the words, and you can add a little bit or subtract a little bit until you get to the point where you finally get to wherever the poem takes you ultimately. Both of these poems, they were. This one, Tombstone, was actually a writing exercise, right? The writing prompt was to write my own tombstone, and so, if you notice, I use the capital Y, U, to mean God. So it's like having a conversation with God and the relationship that a person would have with God. And then with this one, it was just really having fun with the concept of Apple, the iPhone, and Siri. And Siri trying to figure out what the meaning of life is. But, they do, in a way, towards the very end, shave off or lose the insignificant parts to finally reach some sort of meaning in that way. So I guess. Does that make sense for everyone? What the structure is meant to do? I like how you put that, Mauricio, like the evolution of editing a poem or editing a poem as you read it. I like that. Let's see. Is it Ani? Ani, did you raise your hand? Or is it Miss Michelle? I can't tell here. I guess neither one. It's like fun, having fun, word flipping. Yeah. Yeah, or like remixing. You could remix your poem as you go. It's another way of looking at it.
That reminds me of Elvis Presley's song, I'm All Shook Up.
I like that.
Well, a lot of times we do try to find ourselves. Like I say, I'm going to be 78 this year, and I'm still learning more about myself, and the qualities, things that I prefer above other things that I had so much love or affection for. They're mediocre now, and I'm stretching spiritually, not physically. I can hardly lift my arm. But things change. As time brings about a change, new, perspectives, attitudes. I mean, this pandemic has given, I think I can speak for many people, time to, I think I did the poem on that turtle, reevaluate, to rethink, to relook,
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for sharing that, Ms. Lois. And I think that you're right, that you actually helped me sort of tie in what I was speaking about before with the 5 stages of identity formation. You know, we're always as individuals evolving and growing, you know, and if this type of poem, if the recombinant poem is a style that can reflect that, you know, I think that it's possible, because if you look at the way that our identities form, if we actually end up in the amalgamation phase, that sort of unity phase, you know, that means that we've shed a lot of the things that were not important. You know, we've learned and we've grown and we've moved past things that can potentially hold us back as a community. You know, if we reach the amalgamation stage, it means that we're finally open to creating bridges and really being our brother's keeper, which is what I think Gwendolyn Brooks was talking about in the quote that we started off with. You know, all of that, all of the things that we covered today, you know, I hope that they serve as like an inspiration for reflecting inward on yourself and for trying to use poetry as a way of sort of representing that evolution that we all experience. And to say that you know, we finally are at that phase where we are the core of who we are. So, and I think that does bring me to the writing prompt for today. So what I'd like y'all to do is to consider the 5 stages of identity formation and try to write a recombinant poem that shows your evolution. How have you reached your amalgamation phase, if you have?
For one particular subject, or like of your life, or not the whole thing, right?
Yeah, I mean, you know, because we're constantly evolving, right? But you know, at least take the time to reflect on the way that you have evolved, you know, and think about where you're at in your life right now, and try to write a recombinant poem that tries to get at the core of who you are, if it helps.
Can I have another example of a recombinant poem?
Recombinant poem?
Yeah, because I don't know that entirely that I.
Well, I mean, it's a style that I created, at least that I think I created. So it's not like this exists in other examples that I've found in poetry. But, you know, remember, like the basic idea behind a recombinant poem is that it shuffles and reorganizes individual lines of verse, words, and phrases to create variations of that same line in each following line, right? So here, no one ever said it would be easy living with you, but it was much more difficult to die. No one ever said it would be easy to die, but it was much more difficult living with you. No one ever said it was difficult living, but it was easier dying with you. No one ever said it was difficult dying, but it was easier living with you. No one ever said I would live, but I did, and it was easiest with you. No one ever said I would die, but I did, and at that time I knew. No one ever said a difficult thing until you. No one thing ever said difficult until you. No one ever said difficult you. You never said difficult too. You never said you. You never you. So hopefully that shows, right? Every line that follows is a variation of the line before it, and they get shorter and shorter and shorter until you reach the very end.
So it's supposed to get shorter and shorter and shorter too, ours?
Yeah.
Can it go shorter the longer?
I mean, if that's how you want to do it, like, remember, my writing prompts are just, you know, ways for you to practice, right? But that is the style. That was the intention behind the style when I created it.
Okay.
Yeah.
I made something up real quick.
Nice. Feeling it now. Feeling it. Would you like to read it for us?
Yeah, sure.
Go for it.
I'm trying to find the words, but all I find is cobwebs. I'm trying to find cobwebs, but all I find are roots. I'm trying words and find webs. I find words and cobwebs. In words, I find I.
There you go. Excellent.
It's a dope way of writing poetry. I've never heard of this before.
Yeah, I mean, I can't say that I've read a lot of poetry. You know, I haven't read all the poetry in the world or anything like that. But you know, this is a style that I sort of had an idea of you know, just having fun with the words, and that was the result. You know, this style, this form that is, I don't know, different, unique, helps you sort of distill down whatever it is that you really want to say in a poem. So, yeah. So I'm feeling it now. Make sure you save that little snippet there for yourself. So. Does anyone have any other questions or need me to?
Next week.
Oh, what was that?
You said you told Mom I might want to save it. I told him I already saved it. I was going to turn it in next week.
Well, see, now you can't do that, obviously. But at least you do have another example of a poem that uses that style, right? So, yeah. So that's your challenge for this week, is to write a recombinant poem, a poem that, as every line continues, loses all of the excess and gets down to the core of you.
It's down to the apple core.
Whoa. I'm sorry, I heard two people talk at the same time and didn't catch it. What was that?
It's down to the apple core.
Yes, exactly. Gets down to the apple core of you. So,
Good night.
all right. Good night, Ms. Lois. If y'all
Out of here.
all right. So yeah, if that's it, I hope y'all have a good night.
You too.
Take care, everyone.
Good night, everyone.
You too. Good night. Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
All right.